What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another NFL mock draft. We are here 10 days away from the real NFL draft in 2024 in Detroit, Michigan. I'm excited, I'm ecstatic, and this is probably my second to last mock. Or hopefully releasing this early Monday morning or maybe late Sunday night, depending on wherever you are. But then we're gonna have one more a little bit closer to the draft on a more accurate prediction. That's gonna be a 2 round mock. So stay tuned to that. Subscribe if you haven't already. Click the bell if you want to get notified when that drops. But this is going to be a fun one, something I haven't done. I've done a lot of mocks when with kind of assuming what teams are going to do. And in this one, I'm going to do what I want to do. If I were the team in every pick, where would I go? What would I do? And I think we'll see how the draft shakes out. I thought it was an interesting idea. I saw it um it's a YouTube video that I watched by New York no NFL Stock Exchange, the podcast with Connor Rogers, and they had on Bangle, who's a YouTuber who does a lot of mock drafts, and they did kind of a what would I do draft, and I think that's kind of a fun concept, something I hadn't thought of. So shout out to them for the idea. And with the Chicago Bears leading off the NFL draft, we're gonna run in the card with Jaden. No, I'm just kidding. We're gonna run in the card with Caleb Williams at the top. What would I do is also the case of what they should do and what I think they will do. And that's Chicago drafting their franchise signal caller. Listen, I don't have to talk about every team, but for Chicago, you got Keenan Allen, you got DJ Moore, you got Cole Kmet. Um, you feel good about taking the best quarterback available at number one, and you got pick 9 to really add to that offense. I think the defense certainly has talent on it. The question is Matt Eberflus a good coach? And is Caleb Williams as elite as a prospect as he appears? Washington Commanders at pick 2. And I've said that I think they're going to go Jaden Daniels, but if this is me and what would I do, I'm taking Drake May here. Obviously, they need a franchise signal caller. And I think Drake May kind of has a little bit higher of a ceiling. I think Jaden Daniels can be a little um, loose with the ball sometimes. I don't love his consistency across the board in terms of his accuracy and such. Obviously, the top end speed is there. There's certainly a wealth of accuracy among all three of these guys. That's why they're going to go 1, 2, 3 in the real NFL draft. But you're picking between, I think, really two really good prospects. But Drake May, I think you could see it, the ceiling with him. You could see a Josh Allen light with him, and I think that's what Washington could hope to build. And then for New England, certainly there's an opportunity to trade out, and I would not rule that out given where New England is. Um, if they don't like the pick here, could easily see them switching out. I saw a mock, I believe it was PFF's mock, had them switching out from 3 to 11 with the Minnesota Vikings and picking up pick 23. So Minnesota takes Jaden Daniels, and then New England ended up with JJ McCarthy. Now, that's not what I'm going to say happens here. But however, I do think New England needs a quarterback. And I do want to say I partially would be excited by the idea of drafting Marvin Harrison Jr. and trying to get back into the first round to take Michael Penix Jr. But as you'll see in this draft, because it's what would I do, I don't think Michael Penix Jr. is going to last to the back end of the first round. So I'm going to have them taking Jaden Daniels. They get their franchise signal caller of the future. And I think it's just a smart decision. Arizona at pick 4. Listen, you could make an argument about Arizona trading. I've seen plenty of mock drafts where they could move off of the pick. At the end of the day, you have the talent of Marvin Harrison Jr., the overall talent at receiver, and Malik Nabers is good, sure. Really top end speed, breakaway after the catch. Malik Nabers is an excellent wide receiver, and in other classes, I think he would be, a very good wide receiver 1. But Marvin Harrison Jr. is one of the more complete prospects to come out of college, and that's just not me and my amateur eyes saying it. That's a lot of NFL scouts saying that, and so I believe Marvin Harrison Jr. adding an elite weapon to Arizona and their offense, and then they've still got another pick in the back half of the first round from Houston. You feel good about that. You feel good about adding an impact offensive player. And then in the back half of the first round, maybe you go corner, maybe you go edge, maybe you go interior D line, maybe you go offensive line. But here, you pick Marvin Harrison Jr. Give Kyler Murray a premium weapon. The Chargers at pick 5. And this is kind of the turning point. If I had to bet, I mean, in some capacity, I think that Washington and New England could flip quarterbacks. I think the draft starts at pick 5 because I could see the Chargers going a guy like Malik Neighbors. I could see the Chargers going a guy like Joe Alton, solidifying that offensive line. It's Jim Harbaugh after all. I could see the Chargers trading out of this pick and certain teams moving up, whether that's a team desperate for a top end wide receiver, whether that's a team desperate for a quarterback, whether that's a team who just wants to jump ahead of the Giants because they're worried they're going to take whoever they want. At the end of the day, the Chargers have a lot of needs, in my opinion. I think they could be a good team this year because of the quarterback. And if you have the quarterback, it makes things a lot easier. But they need a wide receiver. They need an offensive tackle. They need help on defense. And if you take an offensive tackle here and you wait, I believe their next pick is in the second round, you just don't feel good about the blue chip talents that you got out of this draft, in my opinion. Whereas if you move down a little bit, you get still one of the top end tackles. I think the top end of this tackle draft is incredibly deep. And then you can gain another first potentially, and that's what I'm going to have them doing. And it's what would I do? So I don't have to justify it. But I just did. So the LA Chargers are going to be trading this pick away, and it's going to be the Minnesota Vikings. And listen, I don't know necessarily that JJ McCarthy is going to be the guy, right? I'm only just filling out what will let me trade here, by the way. I think if Minnesota's trading up from 11 to 5, it'll take 11 and 23, obviously, and then I think it'll probably take a fourth and maybe another pick next year, like maybe a third or fourth next year. I'm not sure. I don't think this third is coming back from the Chargers, but the machine will only let you do so much here. At the end of the day, the Chargers net 2 picks, and Minnesota is the question here. Is Minnesota willing to trade both of their firsts, really all of their draft capital that's before the 4th round, and potentially more next year, as I mentioned, to move up and select JJ McCarthy? Is JJ McCarthy that good of a prospect? I think it comes down to 2 things. One, Minnesota needs a quarterback, right? Sam Darnold is not the guy of the future. And if you're not going to, find the guy of the future, then you have a year of kind of, stuck in purgatory. And I don't think that's a great way to operate an NFL team, especially when other guys on that team who you're trying to keep happy could become discontent. Justin Jefferson specifically. And the other aspect of this, them needing quarterback, is one. I guess 3 aspects. 2, them being a quarterback away, in my opinion. They've got talented defensive players. They've got good interior, 2 good tackles. They need maybe some help on the interior offensive line, but they've got good receivers. Justin Jefferson, I just mentioned, Jordan Addison. They brought in Aaron Jones at running back. They got TJ Hawkinson at tight end. I think they need some defensive help, obviously, especially in the defensive backfield. But I think if they get really solid play out of their quarterback, they're going to be a playoff team. And we saw that with Kirk Cousins. They were a playoff team 2 years ago, albeit a little fugazi, ended up losing to the New York Giants, who have the next pick. But then the third option, speaking of the Giants, is that I think a lot of people think that the Giants would draft JJ McCarthy if they had the opportunity, and that they don't believe in Daniel Jones, and that they're looking for their next signal caller. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad idea. So Minnesota jumps in front of the Giants. They take their quarterback of the future, and that's JJ McCarthy. Oop, got my alarm going off. Hopefully it doesn't come on the video. The New York Giants, aforementioned, at pick 6. With the top 4 quarterbacks off the board, I don't think they go quarterback here. Malik Neighbors, I mentioned already, he's a very talented wide receiver. Some people have him right next to Marvin Harrison Jr. in this class, right behind him, or even some people have him ahead of him. I don't. I believe Marvin Harrison Jr. is clearly the more talented receiver, but if your offense desperately needs deep threat, and that's what the Giants desperately need, Malik Neighbors could be that guy that takes the ball to the house if he gets separation, right? A guy who has breakaway speed, who can, get those yards after catch and after contact. I think Malik Neighbors is that guy, and you feel good about him going to the Giants, him being the guy, the number 1 wide receiver, and you got pieces around him to make up the rest of the wide receiver core. I still think they need more than just 1 wide receiver. But you can make an argument for tackle here too. You you draft Joe Alt, although he's a left tackle. Maybe you trade down and get a guy like Olu Fashanu or Tylise Fuanga, who they could move over. Well, he's already at right tackle, but they could play him at right tackle and move Evan Neal over to right guard. And you got, some solid, I think, improved offensive line. But at the end of the day, wide receivers are more desperate need. Malik Neighbors is a huge addition for them. Tennessee at pick 7. And this is where Joe Alt's slide stops. I know wide receiver is certainly a need, but you pay Calvin Ridley. You have DeAndre Hopkins. You probably feel like you're going to get good production out of them. You need to protect Will Levis, and they have a giant hole at the tackle position. So Joe Alt's the guy, certainly. Atlanta at pick 8. I saw a hot take on Instagram, and maybe it might have been by PFF again, that hot take of the NFL draft that no defensive player will go to the top 10. And the only way I could see that happening is if Atlanta doesn't pick here and if they trade out of pick number 8. And if I'm Atlanta and I'm sitting at pick number 8, I feel really good about what we have going. If I could add the right pieces, the right blue chip talent, with Kirk Cousins operating that offense and the offensive weapons we have, right? Bijan Robinson and Drake London and Kyle Pitts and et cetera, et cetera. You got to feel good about that team. I think they were a quarterback away last year. I think that was painfully obvious with how badly Desmond Ridder and Taylor Heineke played. You bring in a guy like Kirk Cousins, albeit off an Achilles injury and 35 years old. But if you get above average to good quarterback play, this will be a playoff team. And so I think you go blue chip talent here. You need an impact player on that defensive line. You could get a quarter, right? I wouldn't hate Quinyon Mitchell. I wouldn't hate Terrion Arnold here. But if I'm the Atlanta Falcons, as much as I like Quinyon Mitchell, I'm going to draft Dallas Turner, get the best edge rusher. And you can make an argument for some other guys at edge. You can make an argument for Laiatu Latu. You can make an argument for Jared Verse. I mean, you could make an argument for Chop Robinson, but I think those 3 are in the first tier. But I think Dallas Turner is the best of them. And so I would take Dallas Turner if I'm the Falcons. Wouldn't have to go far from Alabama to Atlanta. Chicago at pick 9. And there's been a lot made of Chicago taking a wide receiver here. And I've had them taking a wide receiver. I've had them taking Rome Odunze in other drafts. But the more and more as time goes on, I feel like there's a sneaky chance they don't go wide receiver here. And they go for another impact defensive player. Because at the end of the day, you have Keenan Allen. You have DJ Moore. And I know Keenan Allen's on the last year of his deal, and maybe you could see a situation where they draft Rome Odunze, let Keenan Allen walk in a year and let Odunze learn under Keenan Allen and then take his place. I could hear an argument for that, certainly. But I think when you have a defense like the Bears have, and you could add an impact piece like Jared Verse to that defensive front, you pair him alongside Montez Sweat, that's a dominant front two right there. I think Jared Verse, on a lot of people's boards, is the first defensive player, is DE1, not even DE, but is the best defensive player in the draft. And so I just can't pass up that idea here if I'm this team, if I'm running the Chicago Bears. And maybe you re-sign Keenan Allen or you figure out the wide receiver at the next draft, but you're trying to do well this year and put Caleb Williams in a good spot. Getting another pass rusher that can get Caleb Williams the ball back, that would be a great idea. And that's what Jared Verse is. The Jets at pick 10. I would debate a little bit here if I'm the Jets. I mean, you could argue Rome Odunze is the pick. You could argue Brock Bowers is the pick. You could argue an offensive lineman is the pick, whether that's Olu Fashanu, whether that's Tyrese Fuanga. You can make an argument for all 4 of those, really. I think that's kind of the drop off. And sure, I mean, a lot of guys like Fontenot, for example, from Washington, and his ability to move inside, and maybe you draft him and you start him at left guard and you move John Simpson to the bench. I don't hate that idea. Really any of the options available that I mentioned, I wouldn't hate for the Jets to take. But if I'm the Jets and I am running every single team here, I'm taking Rome Odunze and I'm adding another weapon to that offense. You have a wide receiver trio of Garrett Wilson, Mike Williams, and Rome Odunze, and you feel really good about it. And I know you could have said the same thing for Chicago, but Chicago has 2 wide receivers that I think are incredibly reliable. And Garrett Wilson, well, I think he has the talent to be a top end wide receiver in this league. He hasn't shown it yet, and granted, not great quarterback play, obviously, for the New York Jets. But Mike Williams also has had injury history, and playing on MetLife turf certainly won't help that. And who's your wide receiver 3 at this point? Allen Lazard, who they certainly tried to get rid of, or Xavier Gibson. I'm taking Rome Odunze and adding another weapon to the offense. And comparing him to Brock Bowers, I mean, the Jets have a decent tight end play. Their tight ends are I think, up right around league average. Tyler Conklin and Jeremy Ruckert, I think, are 2 valuable pieces. And so you take advantage of those 2. I think a wide receiver 3 being Allen Lazard is certainly below league average. So that's the biggest upgrade they can make, in my opinion. The Chargers at pick 11, probably hoping that Rome Odunze slipped to them. But nonetheless, they've solidified their offensive line. They add a guy like Tyrese Fuanga who can play right tackle, who can move inside to right guard, who could even move over to the left side if you really need him to. You feel good about the Chargers. You solidify the offensive line. And you come back in 23, where I think there's a lot of wide receiver talent available. Brian Thomas Jr. could still be there. Obviously, Keon Coleman should be there. Adonai Mitchell, Ladd McConkey, Troy Franklin, Xavier Worthy, the speedster. You feel good about your picks at that point. Denver, pick 12. This is the question, right? Am I that desperate to get a quarterback if I'm Denver that I'm willing to take Bo Nix or Michael Penix Jr.? And I might be. But at the end of the day, in my opinion, the need for quarterback is certainly desperate. But there's so many other needs on the roster. And I don't think there's a lot of teams, you could look behind them in the draft order. I don't think there's a lot of teams that sit here, in the picks behind him that would be that eager to get a quarterback aside from the Raiders. And I'm going to have the Raiders drafting quarterback, spoiler alert, but it's not going to be the same one. And so if Denver feels that the Raiders are going to draft Michael Penix, you could see Denver trading back and drafting if they like Bo Nix or the other way around. That being said, you don't know that. You don't know what the team in your division is going to do. And if you're sitting here with Denver and you fall in love with one of these two guys, and I think one is certainly a better fit for Sean Payton and what he has going on, reminds me a lot of Drew Brees in a way, the way he plays the game of football. I could see that being the choice here. And that's what I'm going to do because it's what I would do if I am running each of these teams. I'm taking Bo Nix and I'm giving the Denver Broncos a franchise signal caller. And sure, that's an early pick, but at least you give the band something to be excited about. You give the team something to be excited about because it's certainly not Jarrett Stidham. I promise you that. And then the Vegas Raiders, I just hinted at it. They're taking a quarterback, Michael Penix Jr. You bring him in, a guy who's incredibly tough, fits right in with the culture there. And I know Aiden O'Connell's there, and you bring in Gardner Minshew, but neither of those guys are the guy. You bring in Michael Penix Jr., his talent, his accuracy. I know there's some complaints about him not throwing the ball over the middle of the field too often. I think he'll be fine. And obviously, there's concern about his injuries, but you're not asking him to start right away. You're asking him to learn behind two guys, one in Aiden O'Connell, who I think is a backup level quarterback in the NFL, and one Gardner Minshew, who's a top end backup, who's a guy who I think is one of the more valuable guys to learn from in the NFL. The Raiders picking Michael Penix Jr. makes all the sense in the world to me. New Orleans at pick 14 certainly likes their options, but I think if I am choosing for the New Orleans Saints, what's more important? Is it adding an impact defensive player, or is it protecting Derek Carr, which they struggled so mightily with last year? And in my opinion, in order to best take advantage of your weapons, right, of your Chris Olave, of your Rashid Shaheed, of your Alvin Kamara, et cetera, I think you need to keep Derek Carr upright. And so I'm thinking offensive tackle here. Now, the question is which one? I like Olu Fashanu a lot, but I also like the idea of adding Fatanu and his versatility to the Saints, where he can kind of move around. You've got some instability at the tackle positions, right? Guys that may not play more than a couple of years. Ramczyk, I believe, is a free agent this year. The guy on the other side, I can't remember his name, often flirted with retirement. You bring in Fatanu, you feel good about where you're at. That's an insurance policy, or you can play him at guard if you need to. I feel good about drafting Fontenot if I'm the New Orleans Saints. Indy, this might be where Brock Bowers stops his slide. And as much as I would love for Brock Bowers to go to a team like Jacksonville or Cincinnati, right? Can you imagine two tight end packages of Brock Bowers and Evan Ingram? It'd be a lot of fun. Or Cincinnati, right? Him playing alongside T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. But Indy here certainly needs weapons. I think it's a little bit of a reach to go for Brian Thomas Jr. And adding a guy like Brock Bowers would be fun. You want to set up Anthony Richardson for success. Adding a weapon like Brock Bowers, who I think is a top 10 talent, certainly would help that offense. Seattle at pick 16. As more and more as time goes on, I feel like Seattle's going to lean offensive linemen. But if I were running the Seattle Seahawks, I'm going defense. Either interior or exterior defensive line. I don't hate it either way. You could go Byron Murphy here. You could go Johnny Newton here. Or on the other side, you could go Laiatu Latu. And that is the question. Do I want to plug up front with Byron Murphy? Or do I want to? No, Laiatu Latu probably stops the slide here. I feel like a lot of people value him as the top defensive player in the draft, as I mentioned. Going pick 16 is probably pretty good value for the Seahawks. And I think we could look back and say that's one of the better picks in the draft. Jaguars at pick 17. Um, as much as I think they could use a wide receiver, I think they believe in Gabe Davis. And I think that's a mistake. And so if I'm running the Jacksonville Jaguars, I don't believe in Gabe Davis, and I would target a wide receiver. However, that's with all things equal. And I do believe Quinyon Mitchell and Terrion Arnold are better talents than Brian Thomas Jr. The question is, does the need at the position outweigh the difference in talent? And I'm not sure if it does or not. Hmm. I don't know if it does. I don't think it does. I think the talent level is too superior for a guy like Quinyon Mitchell, who I think there's a real shot he goes at 8 to Atlanta. And you add him to Jacksonville's defense. You feel like that's a good equivalent to like Jalen Ramsey when he was in Jacksonville. And I don't know that Quinyon Mitchell is going to be Jalen Ramsey, right? But that lockdown corner to add to that defense when you already feel like the offense could take another step next year with Trevor Lawrence. I like that pick. Cincinnati at pick 18. Um, they loaded up a tackle in the offseason, right? They brought in Trent Brown, and I think they could go tackle again, certainly. I think they could get a wide receiver to replace um uh not T. Higgins. Who am I blanking on? The third wide receiver. I want to say John Brown. That's not his name. Oh my gosh. Bengals depth chart 2023. It's gonna bug me. I can't just Tyler Boyd. I didn't see it actually, but Tyler Boyd. Replacing him could be something you want to do. I don't think Brian Thomas Jr. is quite the fit replacement of obviously of just forgot his name again. Tyler Boyd. But it's another talent on the outside, right? Big body threat, certainly. I don't love by adding Byron Murphy to the defense. I know they could use an impact defensive line, but I wouldn't go there. Olu Fashion is a guy that I think could go earlier in this draft. Question is, does he last past here? No, I'm going to take him. I think adding another tackle. Um, Fashion is another guy that I think could move inside. I think there's a lot of people in the draft who think is destined for a guard position. I don't know about that. I think he's just a little raw on the talent out of the situation. And if Cincinnati can afford to not play him, but still have him as depth, because at the end of the day, we've seen if you keep Joe Burrow upright, you're a really good team if you're Cincinnati. And that's the struggle, is keeping Joe Burrow upright. The Rams at pick 19 certainly could add a corner here, certainly could add a defensive lineman. The question is which one? And I feel like Terrion Arnold's talent is too good to pass up. I just talked about Jalen Ramsey in Jacksonville. You could replace Jalen Ramsey and the Rams here with Terrion Arnold. And I think similar to what I've said for a lot of guys, there's a lot of people who believe Terrion Arnold is the top corner in the draft or one of the top defensive players in the draft. So the value is there at pick 19, certainly. Pick 20 for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Listen, they have a need at wide receiver after trading Deontay Johnson, right? They have George Pickens, but past that, not a deep wide receiver core. So Brian Thomas Jr. could be the pick. But at the end of the day, if you get a guy like J.C. Latham, you put him at right tackle, you move Broderick Jones over to left tackle. I really truly think that Mike Tomlin's goal is to help solidify the offensive line in the offseason. And he hasn't really done that yet. You get a guy like J.C. Latham, help solidify that offensive line, protect Justin Fields and or Russell Wilson. You hope that you could find success. Miami at pick 21. I mean, Amarius Mims could be the play. They certainly need help on the offensive line, but Byron Murphy being a Christian Wilkins replacement on that defensive line is probably too good of a talent to pass up there at pick 21. He's a top defensive lineman, interior defensive lineman on the board. When you have a guy who is as talented as he is coming out of Texas, you have a hole, right? When you let Christian Wilkins walk to the Vegas Raiders, I think that's a plug and play situation you feel good about. And you help solidify that offensive line maybe in the second or third round. I don't know what their pick situation is off the top of my head, but Philadelphia Eagles certainly could add Brian Thomas Jr. as well, but I think they desperately need help in the secondary. Question is it Cooper DeJean? Is it Nate Wiggins? Or is it Kool-Aid McKinstry? I'm going to Gene here. He feels like the more chalk pick, certainly. But I still think he's the better talent of the three. And then the Chargers come back. I mean, they could go Nate Wiggins here, but if you're the Chargers and you could walk out of this draft trading back from pick 5 and getting the fourth best wide receiver in the draft and maybe the second best tackle in the draft, as far as you're concerned, you feel good about that. I mean, Tylise Fawanga, the flexibility he provides on the offensive line and the talent there, and that Brian Thomas Jr. coming in to be a deep ball threat, a guy who's got sure hands, in my opinion. Really contrary to what you have at the wide receiver position. You feel good about that. You feel good about the Chargers draft so far. Cowboys at pick 24. Amarius Mims could certainly be the play. I mean, I know they say there's need at tackle, but I have a feeling they're going to move Tyler Smith out to tackle, and then you could certainly get an interior offensive lineman. Grant Barton could be that guy. He played tackle in college a bit, so he's got that flexibility. I like that pick for them. Green Bay at pick 25. They certainly need help on the defensive backfield. And while I could see them going offensive lineman, with Nate Wiggins sliding a little bit here, compared to where he was earlier in the pre-draft process, I think they go Nate Wiggins here. I've had them taking Kool-Aid McKinstry and other mocks. Could certainly see that if they value kind of the more raw athleticism and talent. But Nate Wiggins, a more refined guy, a guy who's ready to be the cornerback opposite Jaire Alexander in week 1. I would feel excited about that if I was a Packers fan. Tampa Bay at pick 26. Listen, they could go so many places here. And I know they say a need is wide receiver. I don't think that's as desperate as a need as other positions. I think Chop Robinson could be a really valuable impact defensive player. I think that's the biggest need for Tampa by far. And you could argue Chop Robinson is the best talent on the board. I would hear that, certainly. Arizona at pick 27. So we already got Marvin Harrison Jr., a top weapon. I've had them taking Kool-Aid McKinstry. This Marvin Harrison Jr., Kool-Aid McKinstry draft, which if we look back like week 12 of the regular season would have been a dream to get it 4 and 27 because Kool-Aid McKinstry was valued as one of the top corners in the draft. And he had some games where he didn't look as good, certainly. For the Cardinals, I could see them going, getting a guy like JPJ, help solidify up front. You can play him at center, you can play him at guard. But I could see them going Johnny Newton, but I just can't resist the Kool-Aid McKinstry, Marvin Harrison Jr. matchups that you're going to see in practice every single week if you're a Cardinals fan. Buffalo at pick 28. I think they just desperately need help at wide receiver. And if we're talking about play style, I feel like Ladd McConkey is the most equivalent to what you're losing in Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis. I think Adonai Mitchell is probably the better talent. But at the end of the day, there's questions about his dedication. And you already just got rid of a guy like in Stephon Diggs, who you were questioning his chemistry with the team and that kind of situation. So I don't think Adonai Mitchell is the best culture fit there. If you're already having trouble, I would go, Ladd McConkey or whoever you feel like the next best wide receiver is. Xavier Worthy certainly has the top end speed for it. I don't know that's as valuable in Buffalo's system as it is in others, which we'll get to in a little bit. I could hear an argument for Troy Franklin or Keon Coleman, certainly, but I'm going to take Ladd McConkey here. While he hasn't had the college production, I feel like the talent is certainly there. Detroit at pick 29. Now, Adonai Mitchell is certainly interesting here. I don't think they're going wide receiver. I'll go back to the other players, certainly, but I'm going to think through Adonai Mitchell because I find it intriguing, right? You have a situation at the wide receiver position where you've got Amon-Ra St. Brown, who's kind of the all-in-one slot receiver, right? You got a guy in Jameson Williams who's that deep ball speed threat. You had a guy in Adonai Mitchell who's a jump ball guy, who's a guy who you could just easily see it, right? You could easily see the wide receiver alignment. And that's enticing. That's really enticing. I'm going to hold off on that for a second. And you put him in Dan Campbell's system, who could probably get the best out of him, the most out of him. Johnny Newton is there. Johnny Newton certainly is a talent. Amarius Mims at the tackle position. No, I can't do it. I gotta go for Adonai Mitchell, and that AD Mitchell in that offense would be fun. And then obviously you got Sam Laporta at tight end. You got Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery. So your weapons for Jared Goff go from what they were a few years ago to David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams, Adonai Mitchell, and Sam Laporta. Wow, that's a fun offense. Baltimore pick 30. With Amarius Mims sliding, you probably feel pretty good about that pick here. You need a tackle to help replace Morgan Moses, who you traded to the Jets. I like that value for them. San Francisco at pick 31. This one's a tough one for me because JPJ, I mean, we're looking at the last two picks here, and I feel like you've got really still some great first round talent available. Johnny Newton slipping out of the first round, I think is very unlikely. JPJ slipping out of the first round is very unlikely. But I'm picking who I would pick here. Um, Tyler Guyton, I think, could go in the first round, but I don't think he ends up going. And then the Chiefs probably end up taking a wide receiver, and we'll talk about that in a second. The question is the need at offensive line that desperate that you're willing to pass up on Johnny Newton, I think is the better talent. And I'm not if I'm controlling the 49ers. And I'm going to add Johnny Newton to this defense. You replace a guy like Javon Kinlaw, who was honestly a little bit disappointing for them, with a talent like Johnny Newton, who I think could go top 15. You get him at 31 if you're San Francisco. Okay, and then Kansas City certainly could go tackle here, right? If you want to plug Tyler Guyton in a right tackle, I wouldn't hate it. But Xavier Worthy and his top end speed, you have him replace the Tyreek Hill role in the offense. And even though Travis Kelce's getting older and Rashee Rice certainly is in some, an interesting situation, a legal situation, I'll leave it at that. You add a talent like Xavier Worthy and his speed and his 40-yard dash, you feel good about that weapon being built into Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes' offense. So, only one major trade I had here with JJ McCarthy. Minnesota trading up for the 5th pick and giving 11 and 23. The interesting picks of the draft, there's a lot of chalk here, right? The Jets, I think, getting Rome Odunze because the Bears got Jared Verse is certainly, I think, not chalk. The Chargers getting Tyrese Fuanga and Brian Thomas Jr., I think, is a really good value. Bo Nix and Michael Penix Jr. certainly not chalk here, with both the Bengals and both the Broncos and the Raiders getting their franchise quarterbacks. But that's what I would do if I were them. Brock Bowers adding another weapon to the Colts offense is fun. Quinyon Mitchell slipping to 17, I think, is certainly shocking. Same with Olu Fashanu, really. I think these are two really good values here. Pittsburgh solidifying the offensive line, probably not completely chalk, but nonetheless. I think this was a pretty good draft. I mean, Adonai Mitchell, all three of these wide receiver plays. You know what? All four of them, I really love. You have Brian Thomas Jr. going to the Chargers, right? Getting paired up with Justin Herbert and Jim Harbaugh. And you scroll a little bit down, you got Ladd McConkey replacing Stephon Diggs in Buffalo. And then you got Adonai Mitchell adding a real possession receiver to Detroit. And then you got Xavier Worthy adding that speed element back into Kansas City's offense. That's a lot of fun. Those wide receivers at the back were a lot of fun. So I think really what this comes down to is an early run of quarterbacks, some more impact defensive players than you expected, another few quarterbacks, kind of a mixed bag of pieces in the middle, and then some really fun wide receivers and corners on the back. This is a fun draft. I like this. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like I said, this is what I would do. This is not what I'm expecting teams to do. I'm going to have a 2-round mock in the form of what I expect teams to do, kind of a prediction mock coming out within the next week. So if you aren't already, please hit subscribe down below. Click the bell if you want to get notified when that comes out. I really appreciate the support on the mock drafts. It's been awesome. Thank you for watching this Quick Thoughts episode. I hope you enjoyed. Have a good rest of your night. Peace out.